Good evening. It's great to see everybody, and thank you for being here. It's American Thanksgiving, and I'm thankful to have an appreciative audience full of fellow education enthusiasts. I've got about 20 minutes to tell you my full story, the story of the last decade of my life. This is me in my natural habitat where I feel happiest, watching children like this one in Nepal who are learning to read for the first time. And this is my book, which is called Leaving Microsoft to Change the World. The nice thing about having this title for my book is that I got this title before Bill Gates could get the title for his memoir, because I'm hoping to one day license my intellectual property to Bill for a substantial sum of money. And we all know that Microsoft always does version 2 of things better than version 1. I know from my 10 years working there. So my story really about changing my life from Microsoft to doing this work around the developing world started in 1998. I went off to the Himalayas on a 7-year anniversary trek, an 18-day, 200-mile trek of the Annapurna Circuit. One of the most beautiful spots on Earth, unfortunately also one of the poorest spots on Earth. While trekking around the Himalayas on day 2, I met a headmaster who invited me to come see his school. And like many places where their kids are going to school in the developing world, it's kind of simultaneously hopeful because kids are gathering, and it's also rather pathetic that kids can be asked to learn in these conditions. And the headmaster was showing me around the school, telling me how he had 450 students who showed up every single day. And I was kind of depressed seeing the inside of the school the classrooms. And then he said, let's go see the school's library. And I got excited because I am proud to say I was a library nerd. How many of you were library nerds as kids? Quite a few of you, I'm sure. Well, I thought the library would look like this, right? This is what a library should look like. Kids with smiles on their faces reading books. Now, I know it's shocking to think that there are Americans traipsing around the developing world making stupid assumptions, but I was indeed doing that. This was a library in name only. It was a place where theoretically a library could have existed, but they had no desks, they had no chairs, and most importantly, they had no books. This is, of course, where poverty starts, when kids don't have access to books. I asked the headmaster why, and he said to me, we are too poor to afford education in Nepal, but until we have education, we'll always be poor. And this really struck me as being a truism. Why do 1 billion people in the developing world live on less than $1 a day? Why do 2 billion people live on less than $2 a day? It's not because they're dumb. It's not because they're lazy. Simply surviving in these societies takes a lot of courage and ingenuity. They're simply too poor to afford education. It'd be a terrible plight. And I thought about this for days upon days upon days as I was trekking the Annapurna Circuit because the headmaster had given me a homework assignment. I think he realized I was kind of a type A-driven personality, and he said, perhaps, sir, you will someday come back with books. And chapter 1 of my book, Leaving Microsoft, is titled, Perhaps, Sir, You Will Someday Come Back with Books. I thought about his headmaster for days and days and days. And on day 9 of my trek, I got a vision at 4 o'clock in the morning. I woke up with this vision. Now, I may have gotten a vision because I was drinking the local Rockshi grain alcohol at 15,000 feet altitude, but we must take our visions in life where we can get them. And in my case, my vision was of this guy, Andrew Carnegie, the patron saint of libraries, who did a good service late in his life by building a network of thousands of libraries across North America and the UK. Carnegie's system of libraries is widely viewed as being one of the most successful philanthropic investments of all time. The most busy public library in the United States is in Queens, in New York. Why Queens? Highest percentage of first-generation immigrants. The first thing they do is get their kids a library card. So I thought, well, I don't have Carnegie's resources, but I'm young, I'm energetic, I'm a marketing guy. My marketing vision was that I'd do Carnegie one better. I wanted to actually be Carnegie with a yak. I wanted to think big about this, and not, mere donkeys or porters would not be enough. I wanted to have so many books for these kids that we would need to have a fleet of yaks, a flotilla of yaks, a gaggle of yaks, what I thought of as the full frontal yak attack, going back to these villages because so many schools in Nepal needed books. And a year later, I went back to the village of Bahundan, Nepal. And the kids were all there, and they were excited. And we wanted to get the kids to all queue up. My 73-year-old father was with me as my unpaid volunteer. My unasked for volunteer, but he decided to come with me instead. And we tried to get the kids to all queue up and each accept a couple of books and walk those books into the library. And as you can see from this photo, the queuing thing didn't really work that well, because these kids had never seen brightly colored children's books before. They were so excited. They were like, it was like a mosh pit. They were stage diving onto these books. They were so excited. And for me, something changed fundamentally on this day. of seeing that I could make a difference and thinking to myself, this is great, I've helped 10 schools, but this is a drop in the ocean compared to what's needed. And so at age 35 in 1999, I quit Microsoft and decided I would devote my life to starting an organization called Room to Read. It was fairly terrifying. People ask me, what are you doing? What do you mean you're doing this? You're supposed to wait till you're 70 to do philanthropy. You're supposed to wait till you're world famous or you're a zillionaire. You can't do this. And it's kind of weird. It was kind of strange because in most of the world, when you walk into a dinner party, what's the first thing people ask you? What's the first thing people ask you? Audience? What do you do? And I was going from having a fancy title and a fancy card in a major company to saying, I deliver books in the back of yaks in rural Himalayan villages. How about you? So I'd instantly lost my status in life. So why do this? Well, to me, there was an emotional reason. I said, I got lucky. I won the lottery of life. My father grew up in poverty. He was the only one of 7 children to go to university. Only reason he got to go was because of a scholarship. So I did not make a lot of money at a young age because I was smart. I made a lot of money at a young age because I was lucky. I happened to be born at the right place at the wrong time. But more importantly to me than that were the intellectual reasons why devote my life to this. If you look at how much education a child receives and can expect to receive, and you look on the upper right-hand side of that graph, you see the wealthiest countries. The more education a child receives, the better off the country is. Lower left-hand side of the graph, you see places like Ethiopia, you see Nepal, you see Burkina Faso, you see Kenya, you see Tanzania, you see Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's not that people are dumb or lazy. They simply were born in a place that's too poor to educate their children. So, of course, they always stay poor. Over time, societies can lift themselves up to the happy quadrant that the UK and the US are in. But it's going to take a lot of effort to get there. But it can be done. With education, you also get the ripple effect. Education is the one issue that affects every other issue. I don't need to tell you that. You're all educators. But we need to tell the world that we need to invest more highly in education. With education, you get better family health, lower maternal mortality, lower infant mortality, all based on how much education a woman can expect to receive in the developing world. You can look at the fact that an educated woman is twice as likely to vaccinate her children. So with education for the poorest of the poor, you get increased family health. You also, of course, get longer life expectancy, up to 3 or 4 decades longer in the places where people have the most education. So to me, it seemed rather obvious that not enough was being done, that people literally were not being educated, and it wasn't a small number of people. There are 770 million people in the world today who cannot read or write. 98% of them are in the developing world. I know we have problems in the developed world, but 98% of those who are illiterate are in the developing world. It is 1 of 5 adults cannot read or write. So again, why do societies stay poor? Well, it all starts here. And it all starts here, throughout South Asia, Southeast Asia, throughout sub-Saharan Africa. There are now 200 million children who wake up every morning and don't go to school. 200 million kids on the outside looking in. And my goal was very, very clear. I wanted to think big about this problem. In the private sector, in the business world, you learn something called scale. You learn what Steve Ballmer used to say to me, Microsoft's very voluble CEO, used to say, go big or go home. And my goal with Room to Read was to go big, to actually try to reach literally not hundreds of kids or thousands of kids. I wanted to literally be the Andrew Carnegie of the 21st century, or at least build the Andrew Carnegie of the 21st century, which would be a network of people. So that's what I've really set out to do over the course of the last 10 years with Room to Read. The story is told in my book of the first necessary step being to find strong, entrepreneurial, local teams. This is really critical to me. I believe the world has too many expatriates who are in the developing world bossing the local people around. You can find a lot of aid agencies where they won't have Cambodians running their agency in Cambodia. They will not have Vietnamese running in Vietnam. They'll have Brits or Americans or Norwegians. I don't believe in that model. I believe in strong Cambodians in Cambodia, strong Vietnamese in Vietnam, strong Nepalis in Nepal. These local teams speak the local language. They know the local solution. They can get things done in partnership with the communities and the Ministry of Education. What our local teams have done at Room to Read over the last 10 years is very simple. They've gone out and they've challenged the communities we work with to co-invest alongside of us. This is what one of our school projects looks like. This is what every one of our school projects looks like, and every one of our library projects, where the parents give local labor. The parents donate land. The parents often make micropayments. My own view is that too many times in the developing world, we do aid drops that create a sense of dependency over time. There are times you have to do that. There are times it is certainly necessary. But we have to find a way to also move people towards independence. At Room to Read, our belief has always been in what we call the challenge grant. The challenge grant is very simple. We tell the community, we will not do this for you. We will do it with you. We will not be the only investor. We would like to be a co-investor. What that looks like is a scene like this one in rural Laos, where the ground was being broken on a new school. Now, we had a huge problem the day of this groundbreaking ceremony. We ran out of shovels. What a great problem to have. Shovels are not expensive. To have this many parents engaged makes the solution more sustainable. It gives them a sense of ownership. It gives them a sense of pride. But most importantly, it means that they're not going to wait for a foreign work crew to show up if the roof blows off during the monsoon, because they actually built the school. They built the library. They built the shelves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think the developing world needs more of this kind of assistance to say to people, we respect you enough that we're going to ask you to co-invest alongside of us, rather than going into the village and saying, step aside, local people. We're here to build a school for you. There's way too much of that in my mind happening throughout the world. And these scenes, to me, are incredibly hopeful scenes, because parents are the same everywhere. They want their children to have a better life than they've had. And as all of us know, that almost always comes down to education and getting more kids educated and getting more parents involved in projects like you see here in Nepal. Now, a critical thing we've had to do over the last 10 years at Room to Read is find money. We didn't have any money when we started. I had no fundraising experience. We had no endowment. We had no sugar mamas or sugar daddies. We had to go out and build a network. And what I've done in the last 10 years is gone around the world and had a Robin Hood strategy. Everywhere in the world where we have people who have money, be it London, be it Glasgow, be it Amsterdam or Tokyo or Hong Kong or Melbourne or Sydney or New York or Vancouver, we now have 6,000 people who carry Room to Read business cards who have never, ever, ever gotten a single pence of payroll because they volunteer and they adopt projects. They'll adopt a school in Nepal, they'll adopt a library in Zambia, they'll adopt some girls who are on scholarship, wherever it might be. And this network itself is something we'd like to invite many of you to get involved in. Get your families, get your students, get your schools involved in, because we want Room to Read to be a movement. I've always said I do not want to be the leader of an organization. I want to be one of the leaders of a movement. This network, believe it or not, has now raised over $35 million in the last 5 years through 100% volunteer-led, self-organized efforts, which is letting us get a lot more done all around the world. One of the things we've done with those resources is create one of the largest children's book publishing initiatives in the world today. It's one of the biggest we're one of the biggest children's publishers you've actually never heard of, because we're publishing in Lao and Khmer and Setswana, Zulu, Xhosa, Sinhalese, Tamil, Hindi, Nepali, Bangala. We're now publishing books in 21 different languages around the world. This is a critically important thing for the development of the mind and development of education and development of literacy from a young age. Because throughout the developing world, there's no economic incentive to produce books because the parents can't afford them. So the publishers don't publish. So you could be the Dr. Seuss of Cambodia, and who would care? Nobody's going to buy your books. You could be the J.K. Rowling of South Africa or the J.K. Rowling of Laos, and nobody would probably care because there's not books in the mother tongue. That's why 98% of the people who are literate in the world today are the developing world. Now, I'm a pragmatist. I look at that and say, well, that's the way it is today. It's not the way it has to be. There have to be local people who are artistic, who are storytellers. There are oral traditions. There are new traditions. There are people who will probably want to help their society develop through the basic concept of literacy and habit of reading. So starting in 2004, our team in Nepal went out and started finding local authors and local artists who had ideas for stories. And we started publishing in Khmer and Vietnamese and Lao. And what I want to show you here is just, I want you to suspend disbelief for a minute and stop being yourself for the next 30 seconds and be an 8-year-old kid in rural Zambia or in rural Cambodia post-Khmer Rouge or in the mountains of Nepal. And one day you hear some banging all over the school. And your parents are putting up some shelves. They're pounding nails. And you say, Mom, Dad, what are you doing? We're building a library. What's a library, you ask quizzically. And then your parents explain it's a room full of books. And you kind of hear the words, but kids don't learn through words. They learn through experiences. And so one day the red ribbon is cut in this library and you walk into the school. and suddenly, having never seen a children's book in your life, this is what you see. I'm not going to show you all 550 books we published. I'm going to show you 30 books in 30 seconds. Ready? Go. So if you were a kid, would you want some room to read? A kid somewhere in the developing world? I know some of you are worried about this, so I just want to assure you that every one of our books does indeed have a happy ending. Because I know you're worried about that lost baby elephant. So for us, our happy ending is very simple. 10 years ago, it was an idea on a whiteboard. 10 years ago, it's no employees and no fundraising skill or experience or anything like that. And we've come a long way very, very quickly. We have a long-term scholarship program for girls to make sure girls do not get left behind, as often happens in the developing world. We now have over 10,000 girls in this program. This will grow to 13,500 girls by next year. Every girl guaranteed she gets everything she needs to succeed in school. School fees, uniforms, shoes, book bags, school supplies, bicycles, after-school tutoring, mentoring, life skills coaching, et cetera, et cetera. Every girl's guaranteed her scholarship will renew through the end of secondary school as long as she passes to the next grade. Does she? Well, I'm happy to say that in the last 3 years, our numbers have been 96%, 98%, and 98%. The percentage of girls passing in the next grade, which is pretty incredible if you think about these kids in the developing world. Because if you're born as a girl who's poor in a rural part of a desperately poor country to illiterate parents, you have 5 strikes against you. People would expect you statistically to fail. These girls don't. Thank God these girls kick ass academically. They are hungry, and their parents are hungry, and they want to be the first in their family to finish secondary school, and they want to be the first in their family to go to university. In Vietnam in the last year, 61% of our girls have basically matriculated to university, and they've gotten there on their own. They've found their way there and found the scholarship schemes, and this is what happens when society changes. If you actually take a 10-year run, and we avoid the quick fixes, but try to find the long-term solution, which, as all of us know, is education. We want scenes like this one in rural Rajasthan to be the norm, not the exception. Right now, unfortunately, it is the exception. In rural Zambia, only 1 of 5 girls even makes it to 7th grade. But our goal is to change that. The solution is not expensive. It's 160 pounds per girl per year to change a girl's life forever. So why can't we do more of this? Now, I want to be very clear. We talk at Room to Read a lot about the importance of educating girls. I want to be very clear that we are not anti-boy. As a former boy myself, I would never want to be accused of being anti-boy. When we build schools and libraries, they are indeed gender neutral. They are open to both boys and girls. We are opening schools at an incredibly rapid rate. 1,128 schools have been opened. In the last 2 years, I can tell you with pride that every 26 hours, somewhere in the developing world, a new school opens under the Room to Read banner. Every 26 hours with metronomic regularity. We're almost Swiss, we're so boring in terms of getting things done, but we believe the charity world needs more performance and less drama. We've now put over 8 million books in the hands of kids. This number will be 10 million by the end of next year. And as mentioned earlier, we've now opened over 10,000 libraries. We'll be at 11,000 libraries by the end of this year. A new school every 26 hours, a new library every 4 hours. We're now opening on average 6 new libraries per day across the developing world by this power of this model of getting the parents involved. You may be asking yourself, well, that's great, but how do you compare to these guys? The kings of scalability, Starbucks, an American success story. We actually have benchmarked ourselves against Starbucks post-initial public offering of stock, and you'll see them in the yellow and us in the green, new coffee outlets, new libraries. This is important because if the world needs a good latte, the world damn well needs literacy. And we actually have shown that we can actually out-Starbucks. That's a very, very important thing. In closing, of course, I'm very quantitative, but actually the Einstein quote that really resonates with me is that not everything that counts can be counted. And to me, what the future of the world needs to look like are scenes like this one, where even kids who have been affected by a tsunami 1 year later are going to one of the 80 schools we've reopened in tsunami-impacted villages. To me, the future looks a lot like this, where you have girls who are the first in their family to ever go to 7th grade, and the first in their family to go over to 8th grade, and the first in their family to go to 9th grade, and they're telling their little sisters, I'm going, you can go too. This girl is the first girl in her village to ever go to 9th grade. And in the 8 villages surrounding her village, there are now 27 girls in 8th grade, and there are 650 girls in 7th grade, and there are over 1,000 girls in 6th grade. That is how social change happens. I'm an optimist because I see scenes like this one in post-Khmer Rouge, Cambodia, where a girl who commutes to school via rowboat gets there half an hour early because the library opens half an hour before the school does, and half an hour later her teachers come in to get her out, and they say, hey, you forgot to take off your life vest. But these kids are so engrossed, and this to me is so important because the developing world, it's not that people are lazy, they simply have not had the same opportunities that our societies tend to take for granted. Throughout Zambia, throughout South Africa, we work with the governments to train the teachers, to train the librarians. We had over 15,000 days of training in the last 2 years for librarians like Agnes here in rural Zambia, who tells me, I do this with all of my heart and all of my soul and all of my energy because this is the best hope for the children of Zambia. To me, hope looks like this when a little kid in Sri Lanka is so convinced of the importance of reading that he is inculcating the habit in his stuffed animals. This is very, very, very exciting. The closing question I'm always asked is very, very simple. It is this: do you miss it? You did Microsoft for 9 years, you've done Room to Read for 10 years. I think this picture probably answers the question better than my words can answer it. This was not taken during the launch of Windows XP. This was taken the day that a new school was opening in Laos. I'll close with a comment that I think is probably the ephemeral statement that defines what we're all about, and it's from Jorge Luis Borges, who once said, I believe heaven will look very much like a library. A lot of these kids in the world need that little slice of heaven. They need books, they need good teachers, they need librarians, they need coaching. They mostly need for all of us to say, we're going to help you, and we're going to forever end one problem we have in life, and that problem is simple. I think it is ridiculous that any child can be told, you were born in the wrong place at the wrong time to the wrong parents, and therefore you did not get educated. We believe that notion belongs on the scrap heap of history. And I am not going to stop working, and our team is not going to stop working, and I hope that many of your schools will get involved with us to make that a reality, because these kids really need that same opportunity that we often in our societies take for granted. 5 million girls like this one now have access to Room to Read schools and libraries. 5 million. That number will be 10 million by the year 2015. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm going to leave you with one closing thought. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you.